Hi, and welcome to another episode of V4Veganism. I am here with filmmakers Kate and Mick MCINTYRE, and they have created a film, Kangaroo Love and Hate Story.
It's a shame a lot of people in Australia don't love the kangaroos because they are such a great animal. They really are, aren't you?
How did we get so hoodwinked into believing that it was okay to kill our national icon?
This is what they don't want you to see, that's what they don't want you to know.
As Australians, we take them for granted that they're always going to be there. What if they're not?
Before we get into anything about the film, it's very rare that we do interviews with other filmmakers. So, how did you guys even get into, and you can answer individually, into filmmaking at all?
Yeah, you start me.
Well, filmmaking was something that I've always done. It's always been my passion since I was in high school, so it was a pretty easy choice for me, and it's developed now into wanting to tell stories that inspire people, that talk about the environment or talk about social change, and documentaries are a form that do that, and so I'm very passionate about making documentaries that inspire social change.
And so I came from a theatre background, and I used to always perform, and I met Mick, and we travelled a lot with our films at the beginning, so eventually I gave up theatre reluctantly and became a full-time filmmaker. So, and we both actually have always done projects about the environment, so we both have that passion right from the start, and we love being in places, and like on this particular film, we loved being out there in the outback, and you know, that's part of the whole, we like the whole part of it.
Yeah. What are some of your previous films that you've done?
The first film we made together was What to Do About Whales, which was looking at whale watching in the Cape Cod, which was really, wow, that's a beautiful film to make.
Yeah.
And looking at comparing that with whale watching in Iceland and Japan, where they're still whaling, and so we were just looking at the issue of whaling. Is it still a reasonable thing to be doing? You know, why aren't people looking at money from whale watching? So that was probably that was the biggest film we've made.
And then our most recent film that your viewers might know is a film that we produced a couple of years ago called Yoga Woman, which looked at the explosive growth of women doing yoga compared to when yoga was first created, you know, all those hundreds of years ago for men. It is now primarily done by women.
I didn't even know that it was created for men.
So Yoga Woman is a film that is our most recent film.
Okay. So how did you guys even come to find out that this kangaroo genocide, for lack of a better term, was even happening?
Yeah, look, I think we were always interested in the story of the kangaroo. It's the third most recognisable icon in the world, next to the Statue of Liberty and Eiffel Tower. So, as filmmakers, we knew that there would be an interest in making a film about such an icon. And as Australians, we also knew that there was this other side to the kangaroo story that no one would talk about, and that isn't really known, and that is that it is. And so that we knew that it was exploited. We knew that there was a so-called culling of the numbers of kangaroos, but we had no idea of the sheer magnitude of the exploitation, of the killing of the kangaroo. So what started out as a good Australian story soon became something much bigger than that.
Okay, so it didn't necessarily have the controversial intent initially that it.
Well, we knew that there was something going on, but we just didn't know quite what, of course, until you sort of peer back. I think it was in one of the first interviews, one of the government officials told us that it was the largest slaughter of wildlife happening in the world.
That was a shocking thing.
We were like, he just like said it casually in an interview, and we were like, oh God, this is a huge story. This is happening today. Why are we still doing this today?
Yeah.
You know, it feels like there's so many issues we're dealing with in the climate change and so many things. So, I mean, you know, fairly early on we were like, okay, so what else happens here? How did this happen? And, you know, who's doing it and why are we still doing this? So, yeah, pretty soon we found, you know, it was way worse than we had first anticipated.
So the deeper we dug, the more dirt we got.
Yeah.
In this film, you know, even though I think your audience will be really, you know, pretty one-sided. We did want to get all sides of the story because it's
Yes.
a whole cultural issue, and it's historic, and it's, you know, right throughout government and science, and even just everybody who walks down the streets has an opinion because it's our cultural icon, like the bald eagle.
Yeah.
Yes,
Everyone
you guys,
has an
yeah.
opinion, you know, so whether they, so we wanted that whole story in the film. So we interviewed scientists that have completely opposing views, you know, government people that have completely opposing views.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, farmers, city people, just really tried to get a story that would interest internationally.
Yeah.
And also, like, how did this happen? Why is it happening? And, like, who's looking after, who's sort of leading the story, or who's responsible for this mass slaughter?
Yeah.
And so we went everywhere, actually. So the interviews were widespread, yeah. And actually, Mark Pearson, who is coming to the screening in New York on Friday night, he was, when we first met him, he was just applying to be in Parliament. He hadn't got in
Right,
yet. So
yeah.
during the film, he actually became a senator.
I remember.
Yeah.
I remember the day.
So that was lucky.
Yeah.
I remember the day of the election, and it's one of those classic things in documentary making that when it's over a period of 3 years, you often will film something once for a week and then not touch the camera for a week, waiting for the next thing to happen. And I remember the day of the election when Mark was a candidate for the New South Wales Senate, and I remember going, "Oh, do we really have to go and film him at the voting booth?" And we're like, "Well, what if he gets in? Of course you've got to have that."
Yeah.
So yes, we packed up the gear and we interviewed him outside the polling booth. Little did we know that he would get into Parliament. I mean, that's so historic that we have an elected representative in our Parliament on behalf of animals. So we feel like that's such an important part of the film, isn't it? That Mark's journey from being, you know, a candidate to now being a politician that is standing up for the kangaroos in Parliament. Yeah.
Well, that was going to be another question: is how long did filming take? Because it's a 90-minute film that seems to go by, you know, like this, but there are many things that happen. Like Mark does get elected. The other thing for me that stood out that made me question, you know, how long a period of time is this? Is when it went from these ruse shooters can shoot any kangaroo to now they're relegated to male kangaroos, and obviously we find out through the film that that's not, it doesn't really help much of anything, but you know, was that something that you touched on in the film, but it was already in place, or did that happen while you were filming, that they changed the law?
It did happen while we were filming, and it's not a law, in fact, in Australia. It's just a sort of an industry idea that because they were getting quite a lot of flack from their products where people knew that the joeys were so badly damaged or killed during this process, people said, "Oh, we don't want to use your products if that happens, of course." And so kind of they're going, how do we solve this? How do we solve this? And, you know, one solution was only to kill males, which, you know, as the scientists in the film say, is not such a great solution necessarily. And is it a solution at all? Perhaps not. Yeah.
But it's interesting that you mentioned that because, yeah, things are evolving. It seems like the more the public become aware of what's going on, things will evolve. And it'll, you know, one of the main intentions of this film was to create the discussion about is this what we need to be doing to the kangaroo, and so your question is part of that, isn't it? Because things are evolving in how the kangaroo is treated in Australia. Already we're seeing the commercial industry change their tune to only want to kill males because of the public outcry.
Yeah.
And we're going to be very interested to see what happens once this film comes out.
So the film premieres here in New York on Friday, and this is
January 19th.
Yeah, your first kind of showing
It's the world premiere.
It's the world premiere. And I know that Americans will have a very different view than Australians will. How do you expect people in Australia will react to this film?
I think in similar ways to lots of Americans, they don't know anything about it.
Okay.
It's not very well known in Australia. Most of the press that the kangaroos get is that there are too many of them. And this is based on, normally when there's too many animals, it's just something to do with interfering with human life. So the press has taken this line, there's too many of them, that's given to them, and that's what most people just relax and sit back and think is happening. So they're going to be just as surprised as Americans, I think, to find out what's going on. And I mean, we were surprised when we were filming. And historically, you know, some of these things have been happening for generations, so we didn't know that either. So I think the film is the first time, like, an animal and an icon has been looked at from, you know, the last, since white settlement in Australia for the last 250 years, what's actually been going on with kangaroos.
Yeah. Well, and you know, that's the thing is, in Australia, the kangaroo is an icon, the way that the bald eagle is an icon in the United States. So to hear that people in Australia view the kangaroo as a pest, I mean, here in the United States, people consider deer pests for the same reason.
Yes.
But the deer is not our icon. If what was happening to the kangaroo was happening to the bald eagle, people would lose their minds.
Yeah.
So
isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
But I'll also point out, from my own experience, yes, the deer is considered a pest, but I don't think there's any way that Americans would accept exploiting the deer like the kangaroo is getting exploited. So, you know, well, that's
it's
you know, like on the level. I mean, on the scale of the scale of the kangaroo exploitation really surprised us. I mean,
it's wildlife.
We are talking about. You know, we're talking about Europe being the biggest importer of kangaroo parts. We're talking about America being the second largest importer of kangaroo parts.
And see, I had no idea about that. I did not know we were.
This is a large-scale international export market that we're talking about, and I think that's one of the things that Americans are going to be most shocked about. And I think Australians are going to be just as shocked about. But that's part of the reason why we wanted to open the film here in America. Because we wanted Americans to know that kangaroo is openly sold here in America. It's the second largest importer of kangaroo products in the world. It's used in pet food, it's used for human consumption, it's used for fashion shoes, for Adidas soccer cleats, you know, so it's used widely, and we really want Americans to have a look at, you know, the products that they buy, because they might be, you know, part of this situation, you know, unknowingly.
In the film, it comes across that the kangaroo can coexist with farmers, because that's part of the issue, is that farmers, the way that here in the United States, farmers have issues with wolves and bears and foxes and horses, you know, wildlife for their cattle. It's the same issue in Australia with cattle and sheep. Do you think that they can coexist, that farmers and kangaroo, you know, that farmers can come around and that they can coexist?
Well, there's certainly science being done to encourage that, you know, to people looking at ways that farmers can reapproach their way they're working on their land and be open to the benefits of letting that happen all together at the same time. The kangaroos have been in Australia for millions of years, so they're well adapted to the culture,
a lot longer than
way longer than, of course, stock animals have, and humans, and they're soft-footed. One of the key parts of the kangaroo is it's soft-footed. It doesn't damage the land like a lot of cattle and sheep with the hooved animals do. So, I mean, I don't think we have come up with the solution when making the film.
Yeah.
But it appears that that's probably a really good place to start, is imagining that we could coexist with animals and share the same land with the wildlife that's been there for millions of years.
Yeah.
That's a really good place for science to kind of get its way into another way of thinking in the country, you know, that the kangaroos have a right, I guess, to be there, to be on that landscape. They're Australian wildlife, you know, they have a right.
Yeah.
One of the things that we didn't get to put in the film, look, as you can imagine, the hours that ended up on the kangaroo floor, but one of the things we didn't end up putting in the film was the farmers that are working to coexist with kangaroos. Okay. And we're not just talking about livestock, we're talking about plant-based farmers as well, because agriculture covers plant-based agriculture as well. They also need to learn how to coexist with the kangaroo, because the wheat farmers complain that the kangaroos eat the wheat. And so then there's also that plant-based opportunity to coexist with kangaroos. And what we didn't include in the film were the farmers that are working towards coexisting with kangaroos. In fact, some are using them as bioindicators because the kangaroo, as Kate has explained, has evolved over millions of years. So that means it has indicators on when drought is coming. It basically knows the good and the bad times in the climate and will adapt to that. It will stop reproducing in bad times, for example. It will. There are other indicators of what's going on. So the farmers watch, and a farmer can predict climate. Can predict climate indicators by observing kangaroos, which of course you would think is obvious because they've been there that long. So I think the whole coexistence thing is something that we feel very passionately about, don't we?
Well, when we were making the film, that was sort of one of the solutions that we felt had some,
merit.
some merit. Australia's not really looking for solutions at the moment, so we feel like we're at the very beginning of the story. And in making this film and putting it on the table, and people watch Kangaroo, they can see for themselves and start shaping their own ideas. For us as the filmmakers, that's what we really want, is to begin a national, international conversation. And so what can we do? What's next? How do we want to live in the environment? I guess that's one of the key things. How do we want to live alongside animals, particularly wildlife, on the landscape?
Because people just automatically think of Australia as this sort of bush paradise, but that's not the case. We are clearing land, we are destroying our wildlife. So, and as an Australian, I'm really, really passionate about not allowing this magnificent species to be wiped off the face of the earth. I mean, we just can't afford to go down that road.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that is so impactful is some of these broad landscape shots that you guys get, and it's just so gorgeous. And then you see the kangaroo kind of running through, and it's like, why do we want to destroy that? It's so incredible to see. And so I don't want to give too much of the film away. I could ask you a million more questions about everyone, but I want people to go see the film. It's premiering this Friday, January 19th, although by the time this comes out, it'll be next week already, but it is playing.
It's playing in LA and New York.
Okay.
So all the details for the film are on kangaroothemovie.com. kangaroothemovie.com, in case you didn't get my accent.
kangaroothemovie.com.
And on the cinema listings, you'll see the 20 or so cities that are screening the film in cinemas. So, and that's growing by the day. So if they check that website, and also we want people to host their own screenings.
Okay.
So that is also on the website. So that doesn't matter if it's 2 or 3 people in your living room or 50 people in your local hall. We want you to share the film. So that's also on the top of the website, kangaroothemovie.com. So yeah, we really appreciate this opportunity to tell you about the film, and if you can't see it here in New York and LA, there are other cities that are showing it, or host your own screening.
Or wait for summer and it'll come out on all platforms.
Yeah, actually, are there plans for a Netflix release?
We'd like that. Netflix, if you're listening.
Yeah. I think that it's a film that could, be what Blackfish was for SeaWorld, and what the health was for veganism. And, I think that it is beautifully done, and it's heartbreaking at the same time, but it's a message that needs to be told. I didn't know there are so many people around the world that have no idea. So thank you so much for making this film. Thank you for talking with us. Please go check out Kangaroo, A Love-Hate Story. You can come to the screening on Friday, or go to your local movie theater and watch the film for the next week. Or we're hoping for a Netflix release. Please keep an eye out for the film. And Kate and Mick, thank you again so much.
Thank you so much too.
Thank you.
Yeah,
and don't forget to subscribe below.